Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Emerging market assets fell today, on track to end the week lower. Lots of uncertainty in the market now, which of course is related to the US-China trade war and of course rising political tensions in Washington and London. Investors, of course, are wary of betting on riskier assets. We saw MSCI's index for developing world stocks falling 0.5% on the day. Now, these global factors also saw South Africa's JSE slightly subdued today and on track for its second consecutive week of losses. In Nigeria, oil firms Seplat and Total climbed 10% and 9% respectively. However, performance remained relatively tepid today. Now, also coming up on the show. It's a matter of days until Zambia starts importing electricity from South Africa. Japan has signed yet another deal, this time on infrastructure with the EU. And we'll try out an app that helps street-level workers find jobs in Ethiopia. Let's kick off the show in Zambia, where the Southern African nation will now import electricity from South Africa starting next month. This will help plug a severe deficit that's causing daily power cuts, which last about 8 hours. Now, state-owned ZESCO concluded talks with Eskom last week to buy as much as 300 megawatts for 6 months. Zambia has a shortfall of about 700 megawatts. Now, that's about a third of peak demand in the country after, of course, a drought curbed output at the hydropower stations that, of course, it depends on for about 80% of generation. Its deal with South Africa comes at a time when its state power utility, Eskom, is struggling with debt, which of course currently stands at about $30 billion. Now, this raises concerns on whether the South African power utility will have the ability to carry out that deal. Well, let's delve further into this. We're joined by Angelo Coppola now in Johannesburg. Angelo, great to have you on the show as always. Now, we know this month Eskom did reveal that it has only about 2,000 megawatts of spare capacity in order to meet demand, which of course is less than 5% of its total generating capacity. So, Angelo, at some point it had to ration power to South Africans. Where then is the capacity to export to Zambia coming from?
Well, Uche, speaking to an energy expert a little earlier this afternoon, he tells me that he's not convinced that Eskom is going to be able to deliver anything to the export markets in the region, unless, of course, they're planning on drawing from that so-called safety margin. That's an option. The other option is, he says that maybe perhaps Eskom is expecting that the local consumption levels will drop due to the lack of economic growth. And with less manufacturing, there's going to obviously be a little bit more electricity available that they can export. But what we do know is that if South Africa is lucky enough to enjoy better economic growth, then the power to local consumers is going to take preference and priority at the expense of any of their neighbours' sales that had been undertaken or have been contractually agreed to. And that's despite the foreign currency advantages, obviously, or the disadvantage locally of supplying that electricity to municipalities who aren't paying their bills. So it's a trade-off, but the local consumer comes first. But it's also unlikely that South Africa can meet that demand if there is any uptick in terms of local consumption.
Well, Angelo, as we mentioned earlier, Eskom's outstanding debt is about $30 billion right now. How much will this sale of power to Zambia help to boost its finances, given the fact that Zambia is also struggling with paying off its debts, and of course neighboring Zimbabwe still owes Eskom millions of dollars?
Well, look, from what we understand at the moment, Zimbabwe has paid Eskom around 10 billion of its outstanding bills. And it's still getting power from South Africa, apparently, which means that they're probably paying for it or there's some agreement in place. As we know, Eskom wouldn't commit to giving Zimbabwe any power until there was some money in the bank and it had cleared through, and that happened. So it looks like that's possibly a business relationship that's getting better because it's being paid for. Eskom apparently is playing this one by the book in terms of Zimbabwe. Meanwhile, according to the Zambian officials, the electricity that they're going to be getting from South Africa is going to cost the country, that's Zambia, in the region of $21 million. Actual electricity costs there are around $13.5 million, while the transmission costs come in at about $7.5 million. So the dollars will make a little dent in the interest payments that Eskom has in terms of, but it won't touch the capital amount that's outstanding there. It's a small dent, obviously. Eskom, on the other hand, are saying that they're unlikely to provide any kind of preferential rates or discounted payment terms to any of their regional customers because they have their own cash crisis that they're trying to manage. So we'll have a look to see how it goes, but at the moment, that small amount of money is not going to make a huge amount of difference to Eskom's hole that they've dug for themselves.
Well, speaking of its regional neighbors, we know that Eskom does export electricity to about 7 of its neighbors right now, or about 7 of its neighbors. Has this been a significant revenue earner for the firm?
Well, look, just taking a step slightly backwards here, of course, Zambia, as you know, isn't alone in suffering from shortages because of the drought. Its neighbor Zimbabwe is in exactly the same position there. They have been relying on power from their hydro plant at Kariba Dam. That dam level is at record low levels at the moment because of the rain that they're not getting. Those two countries are also using load shedding to attempt to manage that demand, but they also have a foreign currency issue that they have to deal with as their economies are under pressure. We do understand, though, that Namibia and Botswana are in a similar position. Botswana's finances, though, are a lot healthier than the other countries and the other neighbors around South Africa. But it's also unclear how much power that Botswana is actually going to buy. In terms of the revenue generation, well, there are relatively small amounts that are going to be needed. In fact, that 700 megawatts you were talking about earlier for Zambia is probably about what comes out of one of the units at Medupi at the moment. And of course, remember that this is a seasonal demand that's needed. As soon as the rains kick in, there's power that's available. They're not going to be coming to South Africa for any kind of power backup, as it were. So it's not going to pull Eskom out of that financial hole that it's dug for itself at the moment.
Well, Angelo, on that note, what is the latest on Eskom's restructuring? Is it any closer to getting a new CEO or fixing its financial woes and certainly boosting its generation capacity going forward?
Well, look, the South African Employment and Labour Minister earlier, that's Tulas Desi, weighed in yesterday saying that if Eskom isn't fast-tracked and the changes aren't fast-tracked very soon, it's going to dampen growth and investment. Everybody knows that. We are now hearing reports today that the Eskom board has selected a shortlist. It's going to be handed, if it hasn't been, to Pravin Gordhan, the Public Enterprises Minister, who then has to take it to Cabinet for a final decision. Of course, Gordhan will be driving that process, so he'll probably have his favourites amongst the 3 that have been nominated. There are lots of names that are being thrown around at the moment, but none of them have confirmed whether they're in the running or not. We aren't sure when we're going to hear about the decision. Of course, we're going to have to wait for the next cabinet meeting, perhaps. In terms of the restructuring plan, well, we have a chicken and egg situation right now. Will an incoming CEO accept a restructure plan that he or she hadn't been involved in or been part of? And what's the role of that restructuring chief officer that's been appointed in the office that's been created? Where does that person sit? And what are they going to be doing? So there are more questions than answers at the moment in terms of Eskom, but something needs to happen quite quickly, and we're expecting something to be happening in the next 10 days or so.
All right. Well, many thanks, Angelo, for that update. Of course, that was Angelo Coppola joining us there in Johannesburg. Well, let's move on now to Tunisia. The country has hosted a high-level workshop on its readiness to join the common market for Eastern and Southern Africa. Now, the country will effectively begin its trade with COMESA member states by the end of 2019. Well, CGTN's Adnan Shaushi has the details.
A list of products to be exported towards the COMESA is under preparation by a committee gathering the private sector and the different representatives of the concerned Tunisian ministries.
This list, that includes a variety of agricultural, processed and industrial products, will be sent to the COMESA in Lusaka next October to be ratified during the Council of Member States Trade Ministers due in November.
COMESA Secretary General pointed out the importance of Tunisia's adherence to this big market that gathers 21 countries with over 500 million consumers.
I think it's important for Tunisia to join the Common Market for Southern Eastern Africa, COMESA, because it has 21 member states, had 550 million people with a combined GDP of over $1 trillion US. So there's a great opportunity for Tunisia to participate by exporting goods and services.
The official added that the COMESA undertakes to support the country to boost its trade and economic development through fruitful collaboration with the public and private sectors.
Tunisian goods become much more competitive if we're member states to export to other member states than would have been in the past when they were not members. So it's a great opportunity for Tunisia to have a much wider market.
Tunisia officially became the 20th member of COMESA in July 2018 at the summit of heads of state and government of the member countries held in Lusaka, Zambia. The Minister of Trade and the President of the Confederation of Industry assert that COMESA membership will provide large commercial opportunities for Tunisia and allow it to access customs advantages, capture new markets, and sign new tripartite partnership agreements. Adnan Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
And now let's take a look at some of our corporate headlines today. Zambia's communications regulator has cancelled the license for Vodafone's local franchise holder due to a lack of technical and financial capacities. Now, in 2016, Vodafone licensed Afrimax to offer customers high-speed 4G data services using the Vodafone Zambia brand. Vodafone Zambia is expected to cease operations from October 20th. Meanwhile, Kenya's central bank has approved the merger of Commercial Bank of Africa and NIC Group, marking the second biggest merger in the Kenyan banking sector this year. The two banks previously announced the deal in January, creating the third biggest bank by assets in East Africa. Well, NIC Group shareholders will own about 47% of the merged entity, while CBA shareholders take up the remaining 53%. And transactions worth an estimated $20.3 billion were conducted via Kenya's mobile money. Services carried out in the 3 months to the end of June surged 47% from $13.74 billion in the previous year. 80% of the transactions were conducted via Safaricom's money transfer platform M-Pesa. And Cell C is in advanced talks with MTN in efforts to gain more access to its network. South Africa's third biggest cell phone company is striving to overcome mounting losses and add products such as financial services. An extended roaming deal is expected to be concluded in October as Cell C aims to cut its $597.1 million debt. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we're heading into a quick break now. Here's a look at what's still to come. A UK judge allows Nigeria to appeal a $9 billion arbitration award. And demonetization deadline looms for Kenya's old currency 1,000 shilling note.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Naidoo.
Hello, Nairobi.
This
Well, of course.
is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Welcome back. Now, a UK judge has allowed Nigeria to seek to overturn a ruling that would have allowed a private firm to seize more than $9 billion in assets from the country. The judge also granted Nigeria's request for a stay on any asset seizures while its legal challenge is pending. However, the country must pay about $200 million to the court within the next 60 days in order to ensure the stay. Process and Industrial Developments had sued Nigeria over a failed gas project in the country. Then on August 16th, a decision by a London court converted the $9 billion arbitration award to a legal judgment. Nigeria's appeal of this decision, called a set-aside, would need to prove there was an error in the ruling.
It's interesting. I'm happy at the developments. That one, we have taken steps in appealing it. We are not just complaining. And two, that we've been granted the leave to appeal. And three, we were granted stay of execution of that iniquitous, is it tax or levy or whatever I will call it as it were, judgment that was delivered there. You know, $9.6 billion is incredible. About 2.5% of our GDP. It's unacceptable. It could cripple the whole country. We already have a tottering economy, and you come and levy that kind of thing. So I hope the government will wake up.
Well, let's get the latest on this case. Deji Badmus now joins us in Lagos. Deji, as always, great to have you on the show. Now, the situation certainly does not look good for Nigeria. We saw, though, the court granted a stay of execution of that $9.6 billion award. It still has to pay $200 million in security to the courts, as well as, of course, the firm's court costs. What is the latest on this, and how's it looking for Nigeria going forward?
Well, Uche, what the government here would tell you and what some other people will tell you is that, look, this looks good for Nigeria. That a couple of weeks ago, I mean, the situation actually looked bad because some people had thought Nigeria was not going to succeed. I'm talking about the delegation now sent by the Nigerian government, led by, of course, the Attorney General and Minister of Justice. Some people had thought they were not going to succeed in convincing the judge to allow a stay of execution and to give Nigeria the permission to appeal the ruling. But those two things have now happened. So it gives Nigeria some kind of chance, because what Nigeria is now going to do is that it's going to appeal, and then in appealing, it will not be looking over its shoulder, thinking PNID would want to go on to execute the initial ruling now of the court. So you have a stay of execution, meaning PNID cannot do anything. It cannot go on to seize any assets, and then Nigeria would go on to appeal. So everything would now depend on how the appeal pans out. We just have to wait and see. But what the government would tell you now, and that's what the government has been spinning off, is that this is a positive one for the country, because it buys Nigeria some kind of time, and it gives Nigeria the opportunity, if you like, to further make its case now in this matter.
Right. Well, clarify this for us, Deji, because as you mentioned, the Minister of Information and the Attorney General, they both called the decision a positive resolution. But looking closer at that ruling, Nigeria is not actually appealing that award, but the enforcement through the seizure of assets. So is this really a positive resolution for Nigeria in terms of the fact that the country still may have to pay that award?
No, Uche, we have to take a lesson. For instance, you know, if you listen to the Minister of Justice and Attorney General, something he said, I mean, you could clearly see that the country intends to appeal that ruling, appeal against the award, because the Minister of Justice basically said, look, what Nigeria would be doing next is to actually appeal against the recognition, that's the UK's court recognition now of the arbitration tribunal, because something we have to get straight here. An arbitration tribunal gave a ruling, and then gave a ruling now against Nigeria. Then the commercial court in the UK came up to give that ruling now a force of law, to say, look, you can go ahead to you know, execute. But now Nigeria says it is going to appeal against the decision now of the commercial court to recognize the ruling of the arbitration tribunal. So basically, it definitely means Nigeria will be challenging everything that the tribunal did, because Nigeria had always contended, for instance, that, well, that case should have been heard in Nigeria and not in the UK. And remember, actually, before this case went on arbitration, a federal high court in this country had actually ruled against PNID, but then it had to go on arbitration in the United Kingdom. Then one other thing the Nigerian government says it is going to do is that it is going to demonstrate during the appeal that this whole process that PNID got involved in was a sham, that the whole thing, the whole contract was designed to fail, basically giving an indication that it was just going to, that it would be, you know, making a very strong case against PNID to show that, well, according to it now, that PNID was not a genuine company and never intended that that contract worked in the first place.
Quite interesting, because back at home in Nigeria, Deji, the High Court has convicted the firm PNID and its Nigerian affiliate for alleging fraud, tax evasion, amongst others, and that happened this month. So the firm says this is a red herring and the government has no proof. Is this a red herring, and will there be consequences for the firm as a result of that ruling?
Well, Uche, well, PNID says it's red herring. The government says that's not the case. You can understand why. You don't expect that both sides will be on the same page on this. PNID has basically come out to condemn the ruling, for instance, saying that it was basically targeted at PNID, and that these officials actually were coerced to plead guilty in court. But also don't forget that as a consequence of their pleading guilty in court, the Federal High Court also ordered that PNID's assets in the country should be forfeited to the federal government. That has happened. We don't know what assets are involved anyway. But fact is that the case, it's part of the case that the Nigerian government intends to make when it gets, when it goes on appeal now before that UK court, because it definitely will be pointing out to the fact that, look, some of the officials of PNID in Nigeria have pleaded guilty to economic sabotage and money laundering, you know, further enforcing its case that PNID is a fraudulent company and never intended to carry out the contract in the first place. what I know that we're going to see, Uche, is that we're going to see more drama as this goes on. We're going to see more drama in court. There's a chance that it may not end at the appeal court. We just have to wait and see how it unfolds. And there's also a chance that this whole process might actually end up on, at the negotiation table, if you like.
Quite an interesting back and forth between the two. But in the meantime, we do know that President Buhari ordered a probe of past administrations over this $9 billion judgment. Have there been any developments from that?
Yes, absolutely. There have been developments. For instance, a former director in the Ministry of Petroleum is currently standing trial. She's, as a matter of fact, she was brought to court early this week. And of course, the court had ordered that she be remanded. She's been granted bail, but of course, she's not been able to meet the bail conditions, so she's still been remanded. The EFCC says it is still carrying out further investigation and that more people would be brought to trial in the coming weeks. So we have to wait and see. That investigation is still going on. Fact is that, Uche, we're talking about $9.6 billion here. It's a huge amount of money. And Nigeria will do everything it can to ensure it doesn't pay that money, or even if at all it would pay, that, it doesn't pay $9.6 billion, that the figure is reduced, substantially. Because, look, $9.6 billion out of this economy, Uche, do the mathematics. It will cripple Nigeria.
Quite right. Well, I'm sure you're keeping tabs on that. As always, great to have you on, Deji. Of course, Deji Badmus joining us there in Lagos. Well, let's stay in the country, where a group of civil societies and labor organizations have now staged a protest march in the Nigerian city of Abuja. They are calling on the U.S. government to lift a 60-year-old economic blockade on Cuba. The blockade prevents Cuba from freely doing business. And here's Deji himself once more with the details.
It's a rare protest march in Nigeria for the cause of Cuba and was organized under the auspices of the Nigerian Movement of Solidarity with Cuba. It's a group of different civil society organizations committed to campaigning for the end of the U.S. economic blockade. Now, the organizers had originally scheduled the protest for the U.S. Embassy in Abuja, but they were later restricted to the Unity Fountain in the city, where leaders of the group took turns to address the gathering, demanding action from the international community to end what they call the U.S. long-standing economic siege on its Latin American neighbor.
While we are fighting against economic blockade, Africans must also do something to help Cuban people. And one of the first things we have suggested is that within the context of the new African Continental Trade Agreement, there should be special status for Cuba, so that Cuba can trade freely with Africa and Africa can trade freely with Cuba.
People ask why somebody from the United States would come all the way to Africa to participate in a conference around Cuba. The reason why is because it's in the interest of the world's working class. It's in the interest of the working class in the United States. The propaganda you get from the United States is all lies. The United States is a class-divided country. This is one of the most important things that I want to explain. It is made up of workers and farmers and immigrants, people who are just like the people of Nigeria, people who are just like the people in the rest of the world. That is why the Cuban Revolution is an inspiration to us, and we seek to explain it.
The protest march had actually been preceded by a conference.
Well, let's now turn our attention to the 74th United Nations General Assembly, where Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi is now addressing. Take a look.
Mr. President,
今年是中
this
华
year
人民共
marks
和
the
国成立
70th
70周
anniversary
年
of。the founding of the People's Republic of
1945
China. In 1945,
年
the United
4
Nations was
4
born
年
in
后
response to
中
the call
华
of the
人民共
times.
和国
4
宣
years
告
later,
成
the
立
People's Republic of
中华
China
民
was
族
founded, and the
以
Chinese nation
崭新姿态
re-emerged before
出
the
现在
eyes of
世
the
界
world
面前。
as a completely
新中国
reborn
70
nation.
年
In the
是
past
中国人
70
民
years,
艰苦
we
奋斗
Chinese have changed our
改写
destiny
命运的
through
70 年。
tireless efforts.
70年前，
70 years ago,
中国人民
China
彻
put
底
an
结束
end
了
to a
山
period in
河
modern
破碎、
history
任
in
人
which the
宰割
country
的
was
近
torn
代史。
apart and
真正
trampled
成为
upon. We stood up and became the true masters of our
中国人
country.
民从此
Over the past
站了起来。
7 decades,
70年来，中国从
China has turned
封闭落
itself
后
from a closed,
到
backward,
开放进
and
步，
poor country
从一穷二白
with a
到
weak
解决
foundation
温
into
饱
a，country that is
从
open
积
and on the
贫积
move
弱
on the basis
到
of
总体小
meeting
康。
the basic needs of its
8.5亿
people.
人
China has
摆脱
achieved
贫
initial
困，数
prosperity.
亿人迈入中
850
等
million
收入
Chinese have
群体，
shaken off
创造了
poverty, and hundreds
人
of
类历
millions
史
have
的
joined the
发
middle
展奇
income
迹。
group. Such
中国
achievements are nothing but a
用
miracle
几
in the
十年时
development
间
of
走
mankind.
完了发达
In
国
just
家
several decades,
几
China
百
has
年
finished
走
what
过的
took
进
developed
程，
countries several hundred
拓展
years to
了
complete.
发展中国
In
家
doing so,
走
China
向
has
现代化的
blazed a
途
new
径，
path to
也丰富
modernization
了
for
各国
developing
人民
countries,
希
and
望
what
过上
China
更
has
美好
achieved
生活
has
的梦
enriched
想。
the dreams of people around the world
这
for a
是成
better
就，
life.
不是天上
None
掉
of
下
these
来的，
achievements has
是中
fallen
国人
from the
民
sky.
用勤
Rather,
劳、
they owe
智慧
themselves to the
和
hard
勇
work,
气
vision, and
干出来
courage
的。
of the Chinese people.
中国发
The
展的密码
secret behind China's
在于我
development
们坚持
is
中国
our
共产
adherence
党
to
的
the
集中统
centralized,
一领导，
unified
坚
leadership
持
of
走
the Communist
符
Party
合
of
中国
China
国情的
to the
发展道
development
路，
path suited to
坚
China's
持改
national
革开放
conditions,
的基本
to
国
the
策，
fundamental state
坚
policy
持
of reform and
以人民
opening
为
up,
中心的
and to a people-centered
思想。
development philosophy.
新中国70
In the
年
past
是中国
70
不断
years,
融入
China
世
has
界，
integrated
做出
itself
贡献
into
的
the
70
global
年。
community and made its
中国
contribution to the
通
world.
过自身发
China
展，
has
积极
boosted
促
world
进
peace
世
and
界的和
prosperity
平与
through its
繁荣。
development.
当前，
Today,
中国已成
China
为
has
全
become
球发
the
展
leading
的
engine
主要
of
动力
global
源
development
和国际
and
和
an
平
anchor
的
of
重要稳
stability
定
for
器。
world peace.
我们是联合国
China
会
is the
费
second largest
和维
funding
和经费
contributor
的
to both the
第
United
二大
Nations
出资
and
国，
UN peacekeeping
也是安理
operations.
会
China
常
has
任理事
also
国当中
dispatched the
派
largest
遣维
number
和
of
军事人
peacekeeping
员
personnel
最多的
among
国
the
家。
permanent members of the
我们
UN
连续
Security
10几
Council.
年
For more
对
than a
全球经
decade,
济增
China
长
has
的
been
贡
a
献力
prime
位
engine
居
powering
世
global
界首
growth.
位。中国
China
正在致
is
力
now
于
pursuing
促
a
进
new
更高
round
水
of
平的
opening up
对外
with
开
a
放，
higher
相
standard,
信
which I'm
这将
sure
为世
will
界
deliver
带来新一
new
轮
opportunities to the
中国机
world.
遇。走进新时代，
As we enter a
中国
new
人
era,
民
we
比以
Chinese
往
are
任何
more
时候
confident
都更有
and
信心、
capable
更有能力
than
实
ever
现中华
before
民族
to
伟
achieve
大
the
复
great
兴。
rejuvenation of the
比任
Chinese
何时
nation,
候
and
都更
we
有
are
条
in a
件
better position
为
than
人
ever
类
before
做
to
出
make
更大
greater
贡献。
contribution to
我们
humankind.
将以习近
Guided
平
by
新
Xi
时代
Jinping
中国特
thought
色
on
社会思
socialism
想为
with
指
the
导，
Chinese
继
characteristics in the
续
new
努
era,
力奋斗，
China will
砥砺
continue
前
to
行。
strive on and
回
forge
首
ahead.
70年走
Looking
过的
back
道
at the
路，
road we have
我们
traversed
无
over
比
the
自
past
豪。
70 years, we are
展望
full
未
of
来光
pride.
明的征程，
Looking ahead at the
中
journey
国
before us,
充满信
we
心。
are full of confidence about
主席先
our
生，
bright future.
历经
Mr.
70载
President,
风雨洗
on the
礼，
diplomatic
中国外交
front,
初心不
China
改，
has traveled
航
a
向
journey
不
of
变。
tests and
中国人民
challenges
和世界
and
人
has
民始
remained
终
true
真
to
诚
our
相
original
待，
purpose.
守望相
The
助。
goal of China's
中国
diplomacy has never
与世
changed.
界日益
The Chinese
相
people
互
and the
依存，
peoples of other
命
countries
运
have
不顾。
always treated each other
面
with
对充满不确定
sincerity
性的
and
国际
rendered
形
each
势，
other mutual
中国
support. China
将
and
保
other
持
countries have
外
become
交政策的
stakeholders
稳
sharing
定
a
性
common
和连
future.
续性，
Facing
坚
international
定不移
uncertainties, China
推
will
进中
maintain
国
the
特色大
stability
国外
and
交，
continuity of its
维
foreign
护
policy
世界
and will continue
和
to
平
pursue
繁
the
荣，
major
促进
country
人
diplomacy
类
with
发展进步。
distinct Chinese features. China will continue to safeguard world
中国
peace and
奉行
prosperity
独
and
立自
promote
主，
development and
中国将
advancement of
继续坚
mankind.
持
China
独
is
立自
guided
主
by
的
the principle
和
of
平外交政
independence.
策，
China will
既
continue
不依
to
附
pursue an independent
也
foreign
不胁
policy of
迫，
peace. We will neither
继续
subordinate
坚定
ourselves to
维护
others
国家
nor
核心利
coerce
益
others others into submission. We are firm in upholding China's core national interest and legitimate rights and interests. We are against the abuse of power and will never yield to pressure. We will remain committed to the basic principles of sovereign equality and non-interference in other countries' internal affairs, as enshrined in the UN Charter. China will never pursue hegemony or expansion. Peaceful development, which has long been incorporated in China's constitution, is the cornerstone of China's foreign policy. China believes in equality among nations. In the 21st century, power politics and the law of the jungle are outdated and obsolete. People want mutual respect and harmonious coexistence. China stands for equality among all countries, irrespective of their size. China respects the sovereignty and territorial integrity of other countries and the social system and development path independently chosen by the people of these countries. China stands ready to share its development experience with other countries and provide necessary assistance in time of need. Yet we have no intention to export our development model or to lecture others, nor do we attach any political strings to our assistance. China stands for equality and justice. On the international stage, we speak for justice and oppose hegemonism or bullying.
坚持共商、
We
共
wish to
建共
engage
享，
others in
主
extensive
张根据
consultation
事
and
情
joint
本身的
contribution
是
in
非
pursuit
曲
of
直
shared
处理
benefits.
国际事务
We。call for the handling of
世界上
international
的事情
affairs based on
由
the
各国人
merits of
民
each
商量着办。
particular case and
作
for the
为
settlement
最
of
大的
issues
发
through
展中国家，
consultation.
中国
As the largest
将
developing
坚
country,
定
China will
同
always
广大
stand firmly
发展
with
中国
other
家
developing
站在一
countries
起，
to safeguard
维
the
护
common interests
发展中国家
and
的
right to
共同利益
development of
和发展
developing
权利，
countries,
扩大发
and
展中国
increase
家
the
在
representation
全
and
球
say
治理
of
中的
developing
代表
countries
性
in global
和发言
governance
权，推
so
动
as to promote
国际关系民主化。
democracy in international relations.
中国追求
China
互
pursues
利共
mutually
赢，
beneficial
全球
cooperation.
化时代
In
的
this
世界
globalized world,
一荣俱
countries
荣，
all rise
一
or
损
fall
俱
together.
损。零和
A
博弈，
zero-sum
以邻为
mentality and
祸，
beggar thy
寸步
neighbor
难行。
policy are recipes
中国致
for
力于构
failure.
建开
China
放
is
型世界
committed
经
to
济，
fostering an open
维护
world
以世贸
economy
组
and
织为核心的
upholding the
多边贸易体系，
WTO-centered multilateral
推动
trading
全球
regime.
化
It is
朝
committed
着
to making
更加开放
globalization、more open,
包容、
inclusive,
普惠、
balanced,
平衡、
and beneficial
共
to
赢的
all.
方向发展。我们
We do
不
not
寻求
seek
单方面
unilateral
安全，
security,
不谋求
nor
本
do we
国
put
利益
our
之
own
上，
interest
始
above
终
the interest of
将自
others.
身发展
It is our
立
aim
于世
to
界发展
advance our
潮流之中，
development as part of the
在
development
开
of
放
the
中
global
扩
community.
大共同
We
利益，
seek to
在
expand shared
合作中
interest with our
实
door
现
open
机遇共
and
享。
share opportunities with other countries through
主席
cooperation.
先生，
Mr. President,
环顾全
the
球，
world today
世界并不
is
太
not
平
a，peaceful place.
单边主义和保护主义
Unilateralism and
冲
protectionism
击国
are
际秩
posing
序，
major threats
成
to
为
the
突出
international
威
order.
胁。在攸关
At a time
世
when the
界前
future of
途
the
命运
world
的
is
重
at
大关
stake,
头，中国
China has
从
never
未缺
been
席。
and will never
作为
be
联
an
合国
onlooker.
创始
As a
会
founding
员国，
member of the UN,
中国愿意
we
各国一
will
道，
work with other
携手建
countries
设
to build
新
a
型
new
国际
type
关
of
系，
international
合
relations
力构建
and a
人
community
类
with
命
a
运共
shared
同体。
future for mankind.
我们将坚
We
定
will
维
be
护
resolute
联合
in
国的地
upholding
位
the
和作
stature
用，
and role of the
坚定
UN,
维护
the
以
international
联合
system
国为核
underpinned
心
by
的
the
国际
UN
体系，坚定维
and
护
the
以
international
国
order
际法为
anchored
基础
upon
的
international
国
law.
际秩序。面对保
Facing
护
the
主义逆
headwinds
流，
of
我们不能
protectionism,
袖
we
手
should
旁
not
观。
just stand idly
面对
by.
全球性挑战，
Erecting
竖
walls
起高
will not
墙
resolve global
不是办法。
challenges,
面对
and
自身问
blaming
题，
others for one's own
诿
problems
过于人
does not
不是
work.
出路。上个世
The
纪大
lessons
萧
of the
条的
Great
教训
Depression should not
因
be
见不远。
forgotten.
挥舞关税大
Tariffs
棒，
and
挑起
provocation
经
of
贸摩
trade
擦，
disputes
将干
which
扰
upset
全
global
球产业
industrial
链
and
和供
supply
应链，
chains,
损害
serve
多
to
边贸易
undermine
体
the
制
multilateral
和全
trading
球
regime
经贸
and
秩序，
global economic and
甚至
trade
可能
order.
导致
They may
世
even
界陷入
plunge the world
衰退
into
陷阱。
recession.
对于经贸摩
Regarding
擦和分
economic
歧
and，trade
中国
frictions and differences,
坚持
China is
以
committed
冷
to
静、
resolve them in a
理
calm,
性、
rational,
合作
and
的方式
comprehensive
加以
manner,
解决。我们也愿
and
意
is
展
willing
现
to
最
demonstrate
大的
utmost
耐心和
patience
善意。
and goodwill.
但是，
Should
如果不
the
讲
other
诚
side
信，
act in bad
不讲
faith
平等，
or show no
不讲
respect
规
for
则，
equal
我们也必
status
须
or
做出
rules in
必要
negotiations,
反应，
we will have to make
维护
necessary
自身
responses
正当
to
权益，
safeguard our
捍卫
legitimate
国
rights
际
and interests
公
and
平
to
正义。
uphold international justice.
我想
Let
负
me
责任
make
地告
it
诉大
very
家，
clear.
中国
China
作为一个
is a
拥
country
有
with
5000
a
年文明、
5,000-year
14亿
civilization,
勤劳勇敢人民、
1.4 billion hardworking and
960
courageous
万平
people,
方公
and
里
a
辽
vast
阔国
land
土
of
的国家，
9.6 million
任何
square
威胁
kilometers,
都吓不
China
倒，
would not ever be
任何
cowered
施压
by threats
也压
or
不倒。
subdued by pressure.
面对单边主义肆
Facing
虐，
rampant
我们不能
unilateralism, we should not
姑息纵
just
容。
sit
国
idly
际
by.
秩序
The
需
international
要
order
法
needs to
治
go
规
by
则，
laws
为
and
所欲
rules,
为恐
and
将
acts in
天下大
violation
乱。
of international
新一
norms can
轮
only
科技革命的
plunge the
机遇
world into
属于
chaos.
全世界，
Opportunities
其
arising
成果
from the
不
new
能由
round
个
of
别国家垄
scientific scientific and technological revolution are opportunities of the world. Advances thus made should not be monopolized by any single country, and no one should obstruct the efforts of the other countries to make innovations. It is not legitimate nor justifiable for any country standing from a position of power to impose unilateral sanctions or exercise long-arm jurisdiction over other countries, and such practice has no basis in international law. To put one's own interest above the common interest of all other countries is a typical bullying practice that finds no support of the people. The INF Treaty is important in upholding global strategic balance and stability. Unilateral withdrawal from it will cause multiple negative impacts. China is opposed to the deployment of land-based intermediate-range missiles in the Asia-Pacific. We urge the countries with the largest nuclear arsenal to fully fulfill their special and primary responsibilities in nuclear disarmament. China China will continue to take an active part in the international arms control process. I announced that China has initiated the domestic legal procedures to join the Arms Trade Treaty. Permanent members of the UN Security Council need to lead by example, as major countries shoulder special responsibilities for maintaining a stable international order. We support the new round of efforts by Secretary General Guterres to reform the UN system and make it more efficient and equitable. China has set up an 8,000-strong peacekeeping standby force and permanent peacekeeping police squads. They have met standards for operation and are ready for action. China stands ready to work with other parties to fulfill our due responsibilities as a major country for upholding global peace and justice. Mr. President, in a world fraught with challenges and mounting risks, China will remain on the side of peace and justice. We will actively explore and apply a Chinese approach to addressing hotspot issues and play a constructive role in upholding international peace and security. China stands for common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security. We hold that disputes should be settled through dialogue and consultation, and that common threats should be addressed through international cooperation in the interest of sustaining global peace and common security. The Iranian nuclear issue affects world peace and security. All parties need to work together to uphold the JCPOA and ensure that this historic outcome is not derailed. Given the growing tensions in the Middle East and the Gulf region, China proposes the following. The Iranian nuclear issue should be speedily brought back to the track of the JCPOA. The Gulf countries should be urged to establish a platform for dialogue and consultation, and countries from outside the region should play a positive role in maintaining security in the region. The Palestinian issue must be pushed at the top of the international agenda. What we lack is not a grand design, but the courage to deliver on the commitments and the conscience to uphold justice. There should be no more regression from the two-state solution and the land for peace principle, which represent a bottom line of international justice. For the Palestinian people to establish an independent state is their inalienable right, something that should not be used as a bargaining chip. On Afghanistan, what we hope to see is a united Afghanistan where all political parties and ethnic groups together determine the future of the nation, a stable Afghanistan that resolutely combats terrorism, and an Afghanistan that lives in harmony with its neighbors and becomes a positive force for maintaining peace and stability in the region. We will continue to contribute our share to Afghanistan's reconciliation and reconstruction. Regarding the Korean Peninsula, the opportunity for the political settlement must not be missed again. The zigzag course over the past 20 years or so shows time and again that the realistic and viable way forward is to promote parallel progress in denuclearization and the establishment of a peace mechanism to accommodate the concerns of all sides and gradually build trust through phased and synchronized actions. The DPRK has demonstrated a readiness to promote dialogue. It is hoped that the U.S. can meet the DPRK halfway. It is necessary for the Security Council to consider, in light of new developments on the peninsula, invoking the rollback terms of the DPRK-related resolutions in order to bolster the political settlement of the peninsula issue. Myanmar and Bangladesh, with the mediation efforts of China, have reached new common understanding on accelerating the work for the return of displaced persons. The momentum created has not come easily. Waiting without acting brings no solution. It will only further deteriorate the humanitarian situation. Only real action will bring hope and create conditions for reaching a final solution toward the Rakhine issue. All the parties involved, including UN agencies, should help move things forward rather than holding back the process. The Kashmir issue, a dispute left from the past, should be peacefully and properly addressed in accordance with the UN Charter, Security Council resolutions, and bilateral agreement. No actions that would unilaterally change the status quo should be taken. As a neighbor of both India and Pakistan, China hopes to see the dispute effectively managed and stability restored to the relationship between the two sides. Mr. President, development is the master key to solving all problems. Development should be placed at the center of the global macro-policy framework. with continued focus on priority areas such as poverty reduction, infrastructure, education, and public health. We need to maintain global development cooperation with North-South cooperation as the main channel, supplemented by South-South cooperation. We need to build an open world economy and help developing countries better integrate into the global industrial and value chains. The UN member states should achieve complementarity between the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and their medium to long-term development strategies in an effort to pursue high-quality development. China's Belt and Road Initiative aims to achieve development that is open, green, and clean, as well as high-standard, sustainable, and people-centered. The BRI, an initiative highly compatible with the 2030 Agenda, has become a road to cooperation, hope, and prosperity. Delivering real benefits to people the world over. We hope that other countries will seize the development opportunities created by the BRI to add fresh impetus to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. Addressing climate change is a global consensus, and cutting emissions calls for concerted global efforts. The UN Climate Action Summit has achieved positive outcomes. China, as a co-lead of the nature-based solutions, has played its due role to make this possible. China believes in acting in good faith. We will deliver what we have signed up to, fulfill our obligations, and work with real actions to contribute to the building of a clean and beautiful world. China places high importance on the life and health of its people and has always taken a zero-tolerance approach to narcotics. We have placed all fentanyl-related substances under control, a move that goes well beyond such scheduling by the UN. This demonstrates that China has actively participated in global narcotics control with a keen sense of responsibility. Onto the Ebola outbreak in Africa. As the alarm is sounded once again, China has already sent emergency aid supplies to the Democratic Republic of the Congo and its neighboring countries affected by the epidemic. China has also sent public health experts and maintained close collaboration with the World Health Organization and the AU Commission. Besides, China will donate another $18 million to the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. Mr. President, I want to conclude with a quote from President Xi Jinping. Our world is full of both hope and challenges. We should not give up our dreams just because the reality around us is too complicated. We should not stop pursuing our ideals just because they seem out of touch or out of reach. Let us work tirelessly to promote the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and work together to build a community with a shared future for mankind. Thank you.
Of course, that was China's State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi addressing the 74th United Nations General Assembly. Well, let's move on now. A lot of Kenyan businesses have stopped accepting the high denomination old currency 1,000 shilling notes ahead of its demonetization deadline of Monday, September 30th. The Kenyan Central Bank made the announcement in June in a move which is seen as cleaning up the system of illegally acquired money. Here's CGTN's Terry Wangari with more.
Kenya's central bank governor, Patrick Njoroge, displays Kenya's new currency notes. The money came into circulation on June 1, 2019 and replaces portraits of the country's former presidents as required by a constitution passed in August 2010. While a lot of the old currency will circulate alongside new notes, the old 1,000 shilling denomination note ceases to be legal tender on September 30th this year.
There were two reasons, principal reasons. The first is to deal with the illicit financial flows that we have seen. The second is to deal with counterfeits that have begun to emerge.
What we've had in the country is obviously a lot of this money flying around the system. It's corrupt money, it's been running around in gunny sacks, it's been flowing around the system illegally. And I think this is an attempt to formalize the economy and gain better control over money circulation in the economy. And therefore I think it will be effective. And, there'll be some losers, but those losers got this money easy come, easy go.
In June, the central bank said that there were roughly 218 million 1,000 shilling notes in circulation. About half of that has so far been changed, giving indications that the system could have been cleaned off of a lot of dirty money. But not without mischief.
If you look at these car dealerships, if you look at the central bank governor himself spoke about people buying cows as a way of laundering money. There are many, many methods that people have been using for laundering money in this economy.
This is a matter of national importance. This is a matter of national security, meaning it is important for us to see that we are doing this in order to deal with prospective problems that would jeopardize our way of life.
Since the demonetization announcement, the Kenya shilling has lost more than 2% of its value to the US dollar. The shilling is currently trading at 103 shillings and 92 cents per dollar. The central bank governor, however, says that the weakness is not linked to invalidation of the 1,000 shilling note. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
Well, let's head to Ethiopia now, where the creators of a new phone application are hoping to help street-level workers to find jobs. Now, its key function is to provide a platform for people who are looking for job vacancies that don't need either a license or a certificate. By logging into the app, job seekers have access to the contact details of potential employers. The app is expected to open up the job market by helping informal job seekers become more visible. CGTN's Coletta Wanjoy reports from Addis Ababa.
This vacancy notice board in Addis Ababa is always busy.
I come here every day, many days, but today a little paperless. Today is very little. Before this time, I see more and more paperless.
Other people hire newspapers for less than $1 to read through the vacancy pages.
Most people come to here to watch job vacancy because in online internet, the internet connection is very weak. This is the first reason. The second reason is some organizations have not website, so they post their job vacancy here.
But this caters mainly for people seeking jobs that require certain levels of education. Mamil Masresha wants to help people looking for less formal employment. She has developed the Sira app. Ideally, a job seeker needs a smartphone to use it.
It's the employer, they need to provide their company details, very simple. They can just feed in, and then they must categorize their company, the industry type, and then they must have their location set. And then the job seekers, they need to tell, or they need to describe where they want to work and what title they want to work on.
Those that can't afford a smartphone can access the application through computers in internet cafes. In just a year, the app has 3,000 employers and 10,000 job seekers registered. The team also helps people present themselves in the best light.
Now we're adding a CV creator for advanced, and we want to make it very standard because some CVs, they don't even put the dates, they don't know how to make it the CV and everything. We're just going to launch that feature, and also we have a rating system that we're going to add that job seekers can be able to rate the employers, and employers can be able to rate the job seekers.
The challenge for unemployment remains high for Ethiopia. At least 3 million people are out of work, and around 7 million more are expected to enter the job market soon as young people leave education. The Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Abiy Ahmed, has an ambitious plan of creating 3 million jobs over the next 12 months while cutting government red tape to encourage a new wave of entrepreneurship. It may take more cooperation with such innovation like the Sira app to be able to turn the page on high unemployment. Colette Njohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, let's move on now. Tech giant Google is investing millions in training young Africans with digital skills over the next 3 years. Now, the US-based company recently launched a computer science program in South Africa for school children. It is part of Google's commitment to create a strong tech foundation for the continent, which is globally competitive. Here's CGTN's Julie Shire reporting.
Tech giant Google has trained 2,400 South African scholars with critical digital skills over the last 4 years. 16-year-old Seth Schultz was one of the learners who benefited from the pilot program.
I did a mobile app development course. I passed, graduated, got my certificate. I've developed an app to save water in our area in Cape Town, because last year we were in a water crisis. So I've developed an app that instructs us how to save water and allows the community to view our dam levels.
Google is now scaling the project to reach 30,000 learners in primary and high school to prepare them for an increasing number of tech-focused jobs.
We want to make sure that 60% of the ones that are trained are young girls and 10% are actually special needs schools. But the majority of the training is going to be related to public schools, where these young learners don't actually have access to this sort of curriculum.
It's part of an ambitious Grow with Google strategy to develop 100,000 coders and skill 10 million young Africans in just over 3 years.
Getting those digital skills in place, getting coding skills in place at a very young age will lead to a more technology-oriented future, will open up economic opportunity. Right? We've seen this in other parts of the world. What we're in the process of doing is figuring out what is the right mix of things to do that will work in Africa.
Google is also investing in tech startups and social entrepreneurs. It's made more than $20 million in funding available to organizations tackling pressing social and environmental issues in African communities. Julie Shire, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, before we go, let's take a quick look at how Africa's currencies performed today. Now, South Africa's rand looking set for a second consecutive week of losses. We saw global risk-off sentiment pushing emerging market currencies lower today. But also investors are digesting a talk of impeaching U.S. President Donald Trump. Traders say the focus locally is likely to shift towards the ANC's National Executive Committee meeting, which is expected this weekend. Of course, Finance Minister Tito Mbowene's economic recovery plan is likely to be discussed, so do stay tuned for that. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.